Fine, let's start. Number 1. The Serapeum of Saqqara. Beneath the sand at Saqqara, south of modern Cairo, a corridor runs into the bedrock for more than 300 meters, and lined along its walls sit some of the most confounding objects ever left by the ancient world. In the year 1850, the French archaeologist Auguste Mariette followed a half-buried avenue of sphinxes that the Greek geographer Strabo had described centuries earlier, and when he dug down, he found this hidden gallery. Set into niches carved along both sides are at least 24 gigantic boxes, each one cut from a single block of granite or diorite hauled from Aswan, hundreds of kilometers up the Nile. Consider the numbers. A single box, together with its lid, weighs somewhere between 70 and 100 tons. The lid alone can weigh 20 to 30 tons. And yet the surfaces of these boxes are flat. Not roughly flat, but flat to within thousandths of an inch across, faces the size of a small car, with internal corners cut almost perfectly square. That last detail matters more than it sounds. Granite chips and fractures at internal 90-degree corners, and cutting a clean inside corner in stone. This hard is a genuine challenge, even for a modern machinist with diamond tools. The standard interpretation is that these boxes held the mummified remains of the sacred Apis bulls, living incarnations of the god Ptah, worshipped at nearby Memphis. The galleries were expanded under Rameses II, and especially by his son Hamweset, a prince so obsessed with restoring old monuments that he is sometimes called the first Egyptologist. But most of the boxes were found empty or looted, and no inscription anywhere explains how they were made. Here is the harder problem. Granite sits at about 6 or 7 on the hardness scale, while the copper tools of the age sit at around 3. Copper cannot cut granite. What it can do, according to the mainstream view demonstrated experimentally by the researcher Dennis Stocks, is drag quartz sand back and forth as an abrasive, slowly grinding the stone with copper saws and tubular drills, aided by pounding with balls of harder dolerite. Given enough skilled workers and enough years, the argument goes that patience produces these boxes. Others, like the engineer Christopher Dunn, have argued that the flatness and the square interior corners point to machine tooling, a claim academics firmly reject. What nobody disputes is the strangeness of the finish itself. On the same box, you find a face polished to the smoothness of a modern countertop, sitting beside a patch left rough and unfinished. The tunnel turns are too tight to have carried the finished boxes in whole, which means they were somehow maneuvered into place as the galleries were cut around them. Adding to the difficulty, the site sits below the water table in places, so the ancient workers had to contend with damp, unstable ground, even as they hauled diorite blocks weighing as much as loaded trucks into narrow underground niches. Diorite is harder still than granite, and cutting it at all with the tools of the age is a feat that experimental archaeologists have struggled to reproduce at any meaningful speed. To recreate one today at this scale, in solid granite or diorite, with these tolerances, you would need diamond tooling and computer-controlled machining, and even then, nobody has ever actually tried. Number 2. Yangshan Quarry. Near the city of Nanjing in eastern China lies a monument that was never finished, and its failure tells us more than any completed structure could. Around the year 1405, under the Yongle Emperor of the early Ming dynasty, workers began carving an enormous stele, a memorial tablet intended for the tomb of the founding Hongwu Emperor. They carved it in 3 parts, the base, the body, and the crowning head, and all 3 still lie in the quarry today, partly attached to the mountain they were cut from. If those 3 pieces had been finished and assembled and stood upright, the monument would have risen roughly 73 meters into the air, about 240 feet, taller than a 20-story building. The combined weight is estimated at more than 30,000 tons. The body section alone, the largest single piece, is estimated at somewhere between 8,000 and 16,000 tons, depending on how you calculate it. Sit with that number for a moment. There is no crane on Earth today that could lift a single stone of that mass. The heaviest objects ever moved across land by modern machinery, using specialized crawler transporters, weigh a few thousand tons at most, a fraction of the Yangshan body. And that is precisely why the monument was abandoned. The Ming engineers could carve it. They carved the deep vertical channels that separate the stone from the bedrock, and you can still see the marks of their iron chisels. What they could not do was move it. Folklore says that each worker had to quarry a fixed amount of stone every day or be executed, a story that probably preserves the memory of brutal conditions rather than literal fact. But the deeper lesson is an engineering one. Carving a stone and moving a stone are two entirely different thresholds, and Yangshan sits frozen at the boundary between them. The softer sedimentary limestone here made the carving possible, but no amount of labor could manage the resulting mass. For comparison, the tallest obelisk the Egyptians ever raised stood about 32 meters, less than half the height of this intended stele. Today, the quarry is preserved as a park, a permanent monument to the moment human ambition ran straight into the limits of physics. To recreate it, you would have to cut it into sections, which defeats the entire point of a single monolith, or you would need transport technology that simply does not exist. Number 3. The Barabar Caves. In the Barabar Hills of Bihar, in northeastern India, 4 chambers were hollowed out of solid granite more than 2,300 years ago, and when you step inside them, the walls reflect light like polished glass, and your voice rings and sustains for several seconds as though the room itself were alive. These are the oldest surviving rock-cut caves in India, carved during the Mauryan period in the 3rd century before the Common Era, under the Emperor Ashoka and his grandson Dasharatha, who dedicated them to the Ajivikas, an ascetic religious sect. Inscriptions in the Brahmi script name these rulers directly, which anchors the dating firmly. The material is coarse-grained Precambrian granite, among the hardest and most stubborn rock a mason can face. And yet the interiors were carved into smooth barrel-vaulted chambers that imitate wooden architecture, then polished to a mirror finish so uniform it is called the Mauryan polish. That polish still holds after 23 centuries. The entrance to the Lomas Rishi cave is carved to mimic a wooden lattice arch, one of the earliest examples of a motif that would echo through Indian architecture for 1,000 years. Here is the mystery that consensus has not fully solved. How do you polish granite to optical smoothness using only Iron Age tools? The mainstream answer is prolonged, patient rubbing with progressively finer abrasives by highly skilled artisans, and given the hardness of granite that would represent an astonishing investment of labor. Fringe theories reach for lost techniques or advanced tooling, but there is no evidence for those, only the unnerving quality of the surface itself. The polish cannot be an accident of weathering, because granite this hard does not smooth itself. The acoustics deepen the puzzle. The reflective interior sustains sound so effectively that a chant seems to hang in the air, and this was almost certainly a deliberate design for ritual use. The English novelist E.M. Forster was so struck by the eerie echo of these caves that he built the climax of his novel A Passage to India around a fictional version of them. The chambers were carved from the inside out through a single small entrance, which means the builders had to plan the whole interior in advance and work in near darkness without collapsing the roof. Modern conservators have never successfully reproduced the exact Mauryan polish on granite at this scale, which leaves the technique, whatever it truly was, as a genuinely lost craft. Number 4. The Baalbek Trilithon and the Stone of the Pregnant Woman. In the Bekiya Valley of Lebanon stand the ruins of Baalbek, known to the Romans as Heliopolis, and built into the podium of its temple of Jupiter are 3 limestone blocks, so large they have their own name, the Trilithon. Each of these 3 blocks measures roughly 19 to 20 meters long and weighs an estimated 800 tons. They are not lying on the ground. They are set into a wall about 7 meters up, which means they were not merely dragged into position, but somehow raised. Just down the hill, still lying in the quarry where it was cut, is a 4th block known as the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, weighing about 1,000 tons. And in the year 2014, a team from the German Archaeological Institute, led by Janine Abdulmasih, uncovered an even larger block nearby, estimated at around 1,650 tons, possibly the single largest stone block ever cut by human hands. The podium dates to the Roman imperial period, somewhere from the 1st century before the Common Era into the 1st century after. And here is what makes it so hard to explain. No Roman crane could lift 800 tons. The largest Roman cranes handled only a few tens of tons. The standard reconstruction proposes that the blocks were moved on wooden rollers and eased into place using levers, earthen ramps, and the coordinated muscle of thousands of workers, with the quarry sitting slightly uphill so the blocks could be slid downslope. That accounts for the horizontal movement. Exactly how 800 tons was raised. The final 7 meters into the wall is still debated by engineers, and there is no complete consensus. The Roman blocks do carry ordinary tool marks, and the slots for a lifting device called a lewis, the same technology the Romans used on much smaller stones, which grounds the site firmly in known Roman engineering, rather than the fringe legends of giant builders that occasionally attach to it. Still, the scale is staggering. The mass of a single Trilithon block exceeds anything modern construction moves as one piece without a fleet of specialized crawler cranes working together. And the largest block of all, that 1,600-ton giant, was never moved at all. It remains in the quarry, a permanent marker of the exact point where even ancient ambition finally stopped. Number 5. Nan Madol. Off the eastern shore of the island of Pohnpei, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, sits a city built on the sea. Nan Madol is a complex of about 92 artificial islets spread across roughly 18 square kilometers of tidal lagoon and coral reef, and it is constructed almost entirely from long columns of basalt, stacked one atop another like the logs of a cabin. The basalt is naturally prismatic, forming 6-sided columns as it cools, and the builders used those natural shapes as ready-made building blocks. The total amount of stone is estimated at around 750,000 tons, and the walls in places rise more than 7.5 meters high and stand 5 meters thick. The largest individual columns weigh an estimated 50 tons. This was the seat of the Saudalur dynasty, and the major construction is dated to around the years 1180 to 1200 of the Common Era. The name Nan Madol means the spaces between, a reference to the network of canals that separate the islets, which is why it is sometimes called the Venice of the Pacific. And now the mystery. The basalt was not local to the site. It was quarried elsewhere on Pohnpei and somehow transported across water to this reef, and no one knows how. There are no written records. The oral tradition of the island says the stones were flown into place through magic, which is really a way of saying that even the memory of the technique was lost. Experimental attempts to raft the largest basalt columns across the lagoon have failed, which only deepens the puzzle of how 50-ton columns were floated and then lifted and stacked into towering walls. The city was carefully zoned, with separate areas set aside for priests, for the nobility, for tombs, and for the preparation of food, which reveals a sophisticated sense of urban planning behind the raw megalithic scale. The Saudalur rulers used the city as a tool of political control, requiring the island's chiefs to live there where they could be watched. the site was largely abandoned around the year 1628 after the dynasty fell. Archaeologists, including Paul Rainbird and Stephen Athens, have surveyed and dated it, and in 2016 it was named a World Heritage Site and simultaneously listed as endangered, threatened by erosion and encroaching mangroves. Building it demanded not only moving enormous stone, but stabilizing artificial islands on a soft coral foundation in the open ocean, without cranes, without barges, without any of the machinery we would consider essential today. Number 6. The Osirion At Abydos. Directly behind the beautifully decorated Temple of Seti, the first at Abydos in Egypt, sits a structure that looks like it belongs to an entirely different world. The Osirion was excavated between 1901 and 1903 by the famous archaeologist Flinders Petrie and his colleague Margaret Murray, and what they uncovered was a hall of massive rose granite megaliths, some of the pillars weighing an estimated 100 tons each. These are enormous square granite columns supporting equally massive lintels, and the whole building was deliberately constructed below the level of the surrounding ground, so that it sits partly submerged in groundwater. That was intentional. The central platform was designed as an island, surrounded by a channel of water, a physical model of the primeval mound rising from the waters of creation in Egyptian myth, fitting for a monument tied to Osiris, god of the dead. The structure is officially attributed to Seti I of the 19th dynasty, around the years 1290 to 1279 before the Common Era, and inscriptions in the connecting passages carry his name. But some researchers, going back to the original excavators, have argued that the raw megalithic core looks far older than the refined temple beside it, and the debate has never fully closed. The contrast is striking. Next door, Seti's temple carries some of the finest, most delicate relief carving in all of Egypt. The Osirion, by comparison, is brutally plain, built of colossal undecorated blocks in a style that resembles the Valley Temple of Khafra at Giza more than anything from the New Kingdom. The granite was hauled about 250 kilometers from Aswan, the same source as Egypt's other granite monuments, and the same questions of lifting and placing 100-ton pillars apply here as everywhere else. Most Egyptologists read it as a cenotaph, a symbolic empty tomb for Seti, distinct from his actual burial in the Valley of the Kings. Building it meant digging deep into water-bearing ground and then managing that water, a genuine feat of engineering in itself, and rising groundwater threatens the monument to this day, so that pumps are sometimes needed simply to study it. Number 7. Ollantaytambo. High in the sacred valley of the Incas, near Cusco in Peru, at about 2,800 meters above sea level, sits the site of Ollantaytambo, a royal estate of the Emperor Pachacuti that later became a fortress. On its upper terraces stands the Temple of the Sun, and there you find 6 massive monoliths of pink porphyry set in a precise row, each one weighing an estimated 50 tons or more. What makes them extraordinary is where they came from. The stone was quarried at a place called Kachikata, about 6 kilometers away, on the far side of the Urubamba River, and several hundred meters higher up the opposite slope. To get each 50-ton block to the temple, the Inca had to bring it down one mountainside, across a river, and up another, and the exact method is still debated. The archaeologist Jean-Pierre Protzen studied this site closely and reconstructed a system of long ramps, ropes of llama hide, log rollers, and the coordinated labor of enormous work crews. Protzen also demonstrated experimentally how Inca masons shaped their blocks, using simple river cobbles as hammer stones to peck and grind the hard porphyry into shape, since they had no iron tools to cut it. The 6 monoliths are separated by thin, precisely fitted spacer stones, and some blocks carry strange protruding bosses and channels that were probably used for leverage during placement. The famous Andean masonry appears here in full force, with joints so tight that no blade can be slipped between the stones. And crucially, the site was never finished. Along the transport route between the quarry and the temple lie abandoned megaliths that the Inca called tired stones, blocks that were dropped mid-journey and never recovered, and they map out the actual path the builders used. In the year 1536, the Inca leader Manco defeated a Spanish cavalry expedition here by flooding the plain below the terraces. The Inca had no wheels, no iron, and no draft animals strong enough to haul these loads, which makes the movement of 50-ton stones across a river valley and up a mountain one of the genuinely remarkable logistical achievements of the ancient world. Number 8. The unfinished obelisk of Aswan. In a granite quarry at Aswan in southern Egypt lies the single most instructive object in the whole story of ancient stoneworking, precisely because it failed. The unfinished obelisk was likely commissioned under the pharaoh Hatshepsut around the year 1500 before the Common Era, and had it been completed, it would have stood about 42 meters tall and weighed an estimated 1,090 tons. That would have made it the largest obelisk ever raised, roughly a third larger than any obelisk that actually stands today. It was never finished because, partway through the carving, large cracks appeared in the granite, and the whole project was abandoned. The obelisk still lies in the quarry, attached along its underside to the bedrock it was being cut from, frozen at the exact moment the flaw was discovered. And because it was abandoned mid-work, it preserves the entire method in physical form. The trenches carved around it are covered in the impact marks of dolerite pounders, balls of a stone harder than granite that workers used to bash the rock away, a technique studied and demonstrated by the researcher Dennis Stocks. The workers pounded narrow trenches down around the block and would then have undercut it and levered it free. The cracks are the whole lesson. They show the terrible risk of the method, months or even more than a year of grinding labor lost to a single natural flaw in the stone. Granite at Aswan sits at 6 or 7 on the hardness scale, workable only with stone pounders, copper saws dragging sand, and immense patience. Transporting the finished obelisk would have meant floating it down the Nile on an enormous barge during the flood season. For perspective, the largest obelisk humans ever actually managed to raise, the Lateran obelisk now in Rome, weighs about 455 tons, less than half of what this one would have been. Engineers still argue over whether a 1,000-ton obelisk could have been stood upright at all with the technology of the time. The quarry is now an open-air museum, and the ridges and unfinished faces of the abandoned giant preserve the sequence of every step, right up to the moment it all went wrong. Number 9. The Gochang and Ganghwa Dolmens. South Korea holds one of the least famous but most staggering concentrations of megalithic building anywhere on Earth. Across 3 main areas, Gochang, Hwasun, and Ganghwa, stand thousands of dolmens, ancient stone tombs, and Korea as a whole contains somewhere between 35,000 and 40,000 of them, roughly 40% of all the dolmens in the world. These were recognized together as a World Heritage Site in the year 2000. Most of them date to the first millennium before the Common Era, the Korean Bronze Age. They come in several types, including the northern table style, where a huge flat capstone is balanced on tall, upright slabs like a giant stone table, and the southern go-board style. And the capstones are enormous. The largest weigh from around 150 tons to more than 300 tons. The Gochang group alone contains over 440 dolmens strung along a single hillside. To raise a capstone of 200 or 300 tons onto its supporting uprights, the builders almost certainly piled up an earthen ramp, dragged the capstone up it, and then removed the ramp afterward. And moving a stone that size would have required the coordinated effort of several hundred people hauling on ropes with the help of log rollers. This was a society with no metal machinery of any kind, relying entirely on organized communal labor. The tombs themselves signal something important about that society, because only the elite would have warranted such an extravagant investment of effort, which tells archaeologists that these communities had already developed clear social hierarchy. Beneath the capstones, excavators have found bronze daggers, jade ornaments, and pottery, grave goods that both date the burials and mark the status of the dead. Researchers at Korea's National Research Institute of Cultural Heritage have surveyed and studied the sites in detail. What lingers is the sheer physical audacity of balancing a 300-ton slab on stone legs using nothing but ramps, ropes, rollers, and human muscle, thousands upon thousands of times across the peninsula. Number 10. Sacsayhuaman. On a hill overlooking the old Inca capital of Cusco, at roughly 3,700 meters of altitude, stand the walls of Sacsayhuaman, and they are among the most admired pieces of stonework in the world. The complex was built mainly under the Emperor Pachacuti and his successors in the 15th century, and its most famous feature is a series of 3 tiers of zigzagging walls made of colossal polygonal blocks of limestone and andesite. The largest stones weigh from around 120 tons to more than 200 tons, and some reports push the biggest toward 300. These blocks are fitted together without any mortar, and they are fitted so precisely that you cannot slide a knife blade or even a sheet of paper into the joints between them. The joints are not simple straight lines. Each stone is a complex polygon with many faces and angles, custom shaped to lock against its neighbors in a puzzle of curves and corners. The Spanish chronicler Garcilaso de la Vega, writing in the 16th century, described these walls with open astonishment. The archaeologist Jean-Pierre Protzen showed that Inca masons achieved these fits by pounding the blocks with harder hammerstones and then lifting and lowering them again and again, checking the fit and grinding down the high spots until each stone seated perfectly against the next. That process is thought to be why the walls resist earthquakes so well, because the tight, slightly rounded joints let the stones settle and lock rather than shatter. And indeed, these walls have survived major earthquakes intact, while colonial buildings around them collapsed. The zigzag layout may represent the teeth of a puma, matching the tradition that Cusco itself was laid out in the shape of that animal. The Inca did all of this with no iron tools, no wheel, and no mortar. The Spanish later tore down much of the complex to build colonial Cusco, but the largest stones were simply too big to move and remain where the Inca placed them. Modern stonemasons can reproduce small polygonal fits, but no one has replicated this precision at the scale of 100-ton blocks, and the exact method remains a subject of admiration and debate. Number 11. Newgrange. In the Boyne Valley of County Meath, in Ireland, stands a monument that was already ancient when the first stone of the Great Pyramid was laid. Newgrange is a Neolithic passage tomb built around the year 3200 before the Common Era, which makes it older than Stonehenge and older than the Egyptian pyramids. The mound is about 85 meters across and 13 meters high, covering roughly an acre of ground, and it is built from an estimated 200,000 tons of material, including around 550 large curbstones and structural slabs, some of them brought from more than 20 kilometers away by a people who had no wheels and no metal tools. The front of the mound is faced with brilliant white quartz and rounded granite cobbles carried from the Wicklow Mountains and beyond. A passage 19 meters long leads into a cross-shaped central chamber roofed with a corbelled vault, in which each ring of stones is laid slightly inward until they close at the top. That corbelled roof has remained structurally sound and completely waterproof for more than 5,000 years, without a drop of mortar, because the builders grooved the roof stones to channel rainwater away from the chamber. But the most astonishing feature is above the entrance. There the builders constructed a precise opening called the roof box, and it is engineered so that sunlight enters the passage only around the sunrise of the winter solstice. On those few mornings, a narrow beam of light travels the full length of the 19-meter passage and illuminates the central chamber for about 17 minutes before fading. The archaeologist Michael O'Kelly, who excavated the site, personally witnessed and documented this alignment in the year 1967. To fix the exact angle of that light box, the builders would have needed years of patient solar observation before construction even began. The great entrance stone is carved with a triple spiral, one of the most famous images in all of prehistoric art. These were Neolithic farmers, working with stone, wood, antler, and bone, and they left behind a waterproof roof that outlasts most modern construction, and an astronomical instrument accurate enough to catch the turning of the year. Number 12. The Great Pyramid of Giza. We end with the most famous structure of them all, and familiarity should not dull how genuinely impossible it remains. The Great Pyramid on the Giza Plateau was built for the pharaoh Khufu of the 4th dynasty around the year 2560 before the Common Era, and it rose to a height of about 146.5 meters, remaining the tallest structure on Earth for nearly 3,800 years. It is composed of an estimated 2.3 million stone blocks, averaging about 2.5 tons each, with some of the interior granite beams weighing as much as 80 tons. Now consider the precision. The base covers about 13 acres, and its sides are aligned to true north within about 0.05 of a single degree, an accuracy that would challenge a modern surveyor, working without instruments. The base is leveled across its 230-meter sides to within about 2 centimeters. The original outer casing stones of polished white limestone from Tura were fitted together with joints only about 0.5 millimeter wide. The granite beams that roof the king's chamber were quarried at Aswan, hauled 250 kilometers, and then raised some 70 meters up into the body of the pyramid. The builders were not slaves, but organized crews of skilled workers, and the archaeologists Mark Lehner and Zahi Hawass excavated their villages, bakeries, and cemeteries nearby. In the year 2013, a set of papyri discovered at Wadi al-Jarf, known as the Diary of Merer, recorded the transport of Tura limestone by boat to Giza in the actual words of a work gang overseer. Exactly how the blocks were raised is still debated, whether by a long straight ramp, a spiral ramp winding up the outside, or an internal ramp hidden within the pyramid, a theory proposed by the architect Jean-Pierre Houdin. To set 2.3 million blocks over roughly 20 years would mean placing a block every few minutes of every working day. The precision of the casing joints on a monument of this size has never been reproduced in the modern era, and recreating the entire pyramid, block for block, with its sub-degree astronomical alignment is considered impractical even with today's machinery. Step back from the individual sites and a pattern comes into focus, one that explains why these structures resist recreation. There are really two separate thresholds in monumental building. The first is whether a stone can be carved at all, and the second is whether it can be moved and raised once carved. Yangshan and the unfinished obelisk of Aswan both failed at that second threshold. The builders proved they could shape the stone, and then discovered they could not move what they had made. Baalbek and Ollantaytambo crossed both thresholds, and that is exactly what makes them marvels rather than ruins. The physics behind this is unforgiving. When you double the size of a block, its weight increases eightfold, because weight scales with volume. A stone twice as tall is not twice as heavy, but 8 times as heavy, which is why ambition runs into a wall so suddenly. And modern cranes, powerful as they are limited less by lifting power than by the ground beneath them and the rigging around them, both of which the ancient sites make nearly impossible. Alongside mass runs a second frontier, precision. The Serapeum boxes, the Barabar polish, the Sacsayhuaman joints, and the Giza casing all represent a level of fit and finish that had nothing to do with weight and everything to do with patience. What is rare is the combination. Very few structures pushed both mass and precision to the limit at once, and the two that did most completely, Giza and Baalbek, are the ones that still astonish engineers. The ancient advantage was time and organized labor on a scale we can no longer afford. A modern building is designed to last decades, and its cost is measured in wages and deadlines, which forces us towards speed and machinery. The ancient builders were solving a different problem. They were building for eternity, with labor that was effectively unlimited and time that stretched across the reigns of kings. Dry stone fitting that resists earthquakes, corbel roofs that shed water for 5,000 years, alignments locked to the sun and stars. These are optimizations that reward patience and punish haste, and we have organized our entire economy around the opposite trade-off. That single fact reframes the whole question of why we cannot recreate these things. For all their variety, these builders drew on a surprisingly consistent set of techniques, and understanding them dissolves much of the supposed mystery while sharpening what remains. To work the hardest stone, they used pounders of dolerite, a rock harder than granite, bashing the surface away grain by grain, as the Aswan Quarry marks show plainly. They dragged copper saws loaded with quartz sand, letting the sand rather than the metal do the cutting. They split stone by driving in wooden wedges and soaking them so they swelled and cracked the rock along a line. To move the results, they laid heavy blocks on wooden sledges and log rollers, often running them over tracks lubricated with water or wet mud to cut the friction, a detail actually shown in an ancient Egyptian tomb painting. They built ramps of earth and rubble to raise stones and then dismantled them, which is why the ramps rarely survive, and it is the same solution behind both the Korean dolmens and the Egyptian pyramids. For fine lifting, they used levers and a clever slot and wedge device called a Lewis, and they seated massive lintels precisely by lowering them onto beds of sand that could be drained away a little at a time. Above all, they commanded human labor in enormous coordinated numbers, directed by specialists whose knowledge passed from generation to generation without a single written manual. That last point is the crucial one. What has truly been lost is not some secret physics, but the entire social machine, the trained crews, the accumulated craft, the organizing systems that could point thousands of skilled hands at one stone for years. They surveyed with plumb bobs, water levels, and sighting rods, and they read the positions of circumpolar stars to fix their monuments to the compass with astonishing accuracy. The knowledge that guided all of this belonged to specialist castes, artisans, and overseers whose craft was learned over a lifetime and taught to the next generation by hand and by voice. The barrier is not the laws of nature. It is the disappearance of the world that could marshal that much patient, expert effort. Honesty demands that we name the genuine gaps, because they are real. We do not fully know how the Serapeum's internal corners were cut so square in granite. We do not know exactly how the Barabar Caves were polished to a mirror with Iron Age tools. We do not know for certain whether Baalbek's 800-ton blocks were raised by ramp, by lever, or by some combination now forgotten. We do not know how the basalt of Nan Madol crossed open water at 50 tons a column, since every modern attempt to raft it has failed. We do not know whether the megalithic core of the Osirion truly belongs to Seti I or to an older phase. We do not know the precise route and method by which the Ollantaytambo monoliths crossed their river. We do not know whether the 1,000-ton obelisk of Aswan could ever actually have been stood upright. We do not know the exact geometry of the ramp that built the Great Pyramid. We do not know how the dolmen builders balanced their heaviest capstone safely, or how many people it truly took. Much of what we have lost is the perishable part of the work, the wooden scaffolding, the machines of rope and timber, the organizing knowledge that lived only in people's heads. The size of the labor forces is estimated, and the estimates vary enormously. Whether the celebrated precision survives rigorous remeasurement is, in some cases, still an open question. We do not know why several of these projects were abandoned, when they were, whether from a cracked stone, a dead king, a lost war, or simply a limit reached. And we do not fully understand why cultures separated by oceans and thousands of years arrived at such similar solutions. The ramp, the roller, the pounded joint, the aligned sightline, apparently without contact between them. These are not gaps that invite fantasy. They are the ordinary, humbling frontier of a field still working, patiently to understand exactly how much our ancestors could do. It is worth being precise about what recreating these structures would actually require, because the reality is more interesting than the myth. Cranes do exist that can lift 800 tons or more, but they need vast, flat, engineered staging areas to operate, and the ancient sites sit on hilltops, on coral reefs, and in narrow river valleys that are hostile to any such rig. Moving a monolith on the scale of the Yangshan stele body simply exceeds all transport technology that exists, full stop. Matching the precision of the Serapeum boxes is possible with diamond tooling and computer-controlled machining, but the cost would be enormous, and no one has ever done it at that size. Hand-fitting polygonal walls of 100-ton blocks the way the Inca did is economically unthinkable today, because labor that once took decades is unaffordable at modern wages, and sourcing and transporting matching stone is itself a major project. When modern teams do attempt recreations, they usually shrink the scale drastically. A well-known documentary experiment in the year 1999 tried to raise an obelisk of only about 25 tons, a small fraction of the ancient giants, and even that proved difficult. A full-scale recreation of any of these structures would be a project on the order of a national budget stretched across decades. So for many of these sites, the phrase "cannot recreate" really means will not, because the expense and the risk are prohibitive, and modern safety codes would forbid the methods most likely used. But for a few, such as moving the Yangshan monolith in one piece, it remains a true and absolute technical wall. There is also the matter of knowledge itself. When a technique lives only in the hands and memory of the people who practice it, and those people and their entire way of working vanish, the method can be genuinely lost rather than merely expensive, and reverse engineering a result does not always recover the road that led to it. The combination we cannot cheaply match is precision and mass achieved without machines, by a system of human effort that no longer exists. What ties all 12 of these structures together is a single humbling fact. The people who built them had no engines, no steel, no computers, and no cranes. What they had instead was time, coordination, careful observation of the world, and skill accumulated across many generations. Each of these structures marks a frontier, a point at which human hands, working together in vast numbers, reach the very edge of what was physically possible. The real mystery is not some fantasy of lost visitors from elsewhere. It is the far more interesting question of how entire societies organize themselves to raise 800-ton stones and to catch the light of a single sunrise in a stone chamber. They achieved precision without instruments and moved mass without engines. And these monuments survive precisely because they were overbuilt for eternity, in an age that thought in terms of forever, while we build for decades. There is a thread that runs through all of them, from the dawn light sliding down the passage at Newgrange to the sides of the Great Pyramid squared to true north, a thread of people looking hard at the sky and the stone and refusing to accept the limits of their tools. When we say a structure is impossible to recreate, what we usually mean is that it would be unaffordable to attempt, and that some part of how it was done remains genuinely unexplained. Both of those things keep archaeology honest and keep the rest of us curious. The names of the workers who pounded the granite and hauled the ropes are gone, but the stone they shaped still stands. Think back to that dark corridor at Saqqara and the polished granite boxes waiting in the silence for someone to explain them. The question they pose has never been fully answered, and neither, perhaps, has the question posed by any of the others. The stone simply stands, patient and enduring, still holding its secrets against the passage of time.